Preceded by a shower of flares, German bombers rained fire and high explosive bombs in their most savage attack on London. Here again is the blood, the sweat and tears that Nazi warfare brings to the men, women and children of city, town and village. Here again are the same firefighters who face peril and danger with the same grim determination and courage. Amid the rain of bombs and falling masonry, they fight the hell of Hitler's making, while our cameramen record for all time their stupendous task.
I was born in 1942 and grew into an inquisitive toddler during the remaining years of World War II. Obviously, my memory of that time is limited, but two things have stuck. The first is the sound of the bomb warning siren. After the war, these sirens were still used by fire brigades in some towns, and were retained into the Cold War period as a knell of atomic disaster, and that sound still chills my heart. We all lived near Blacklin, London with my grandparents, and in the back garden Grandpa had dug out an Anderson shelter, which was a big hole in the ground with a tin roof. And so, this is my second memory, being bundled out of bed at night, into the huddled shelter to wait for a bomb raid to pass. I learned later that because of the striations in the walls of our dugout, it was affectionately referred to as Chateau Gatto. Now, Dad, like so many of that generation, never talked about the war. But I'm going to read the text of a letter written by him to his parents in India, describing his Dunkirk experience. It was passed to the Indian Express for publication, dated 3rd of June, 1940. And this was the day before Winston Churchill's famous speech to the House of Commons. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
And so I now read a soldier's tale. The address on this letter marks a journey's end, a journey that took a week to accomplish, and what a trip it has been. On Sunday, May the 26th, things began to look very uncomfortable. A town a few miles up the road had been heavily bombed for several days, with planes coming overhead in increasing numbers. We had orders to stand by with kit ready packed on the bikes, and on Monday morning at 6 a.m. we set off. Half a mile out, the first Jerry came overhead to machine gun us, but we still managed to find shelter in the roadside ditch in time, and the incident passed without casualties. We reached our destination safely, but there, if anything, the atmosphere was even more unhealthy. A German battery had broken through, and we had to seek shelter along the road bank from concentrated shell fire and bombs. We stayed there some time to allow our heavy stuff to pass on, but finally it was decided that a message would have to be taken back to the place where we started, and this I had to do. We'd come by a roundabout way, mostly country lanes, which I couldn't hope to remember. With all the mobile German units flying about, it was a risky business losing the way, so I took a chance and chose the main road. Quicker, but of course more heavily patrolled. Some of the towns I passed through were in a hell of a mess, and several times I nearly wrecked the bike, avoiding debris, and keeping one wary eye on the sky. However, it worked, and I got my message through all right. I stayed there for the afternoon and travelled up with the convoy at about 6 p.m. We were on the side roads again, but this time Jerry spotted us before we saw him. As we came out of a village and rounded a corner, he swooped low and we heard the angry sputtering of the machine gun. Before I had time to park the bike and find a ditch, I'd stopped a few bullets in my left leg. When he'd passed over, the officers helped me dress the wounds. We made a tourniquet with the help of a soup ladle, and I was made comfortable in the Humber Snipe utility van. Fortunately, nothing else happened until we reached a Red Cross post, where I was bandaged and sent in an ambulance to a field clearing station. And here I received proper treatment, injections and all the rest of it. We were supposed to go to the coast the following day, but there was no transport until late afternoon. Meanwhile, bombs had been falling very close. After about 4 hours' travel, we halted in a small village. We spent the night closely packed together on the floors of classrooms and corridors of a convent school. When I woke up next morning, the fellow lying next to me had died. Poor devil. We waited and waited all that next day, but the Germans were closing in. In the afternoon we were bombed, and at 9 o'clock shelled, a frightening experience for all lying helpless on stretchers. For 3/4 of an hour shells whined overhead, tearing the roof off and shattering every pane of glass in the building. When it subsided, we were carried outside a few hundred yards up the road and left to wait for any passing convoy. It was a dark night and a fairly heavy ground mist. After about 1/4 of an hour, a passing anti-tank lorry picked me up. My hopes revived when I heard that they were heading for the coast, but en route we were diverted to the front line, and of course, willy-nilly, my lot was tied up with theirs. About 3 we halted at a farm, and I spent the rest of the night in the barn in company with some cows, calves, chickens, English troops and Belgian refugees. The latter were evacuated about 4 o'clock, and at about 5 the gun was positioned and battle commenced. About 7 the captain entered the barn to announce that an ambulance was there to pick me up, and this time we made the coast. We were taken to a hotel near the harbour and were left there until 3 the following morning. The suffering that was concentrated on the ground floor of that hotel is beyond words. Pain can't be described, and thank God it can't be remembered. I had dozed for almost an hour, and when I opened my eyes, still half asleep, a padre was standing over me and asked whether I was R.C. or C of E. I'm afraid I had to answer no to a good many of his questions, whether I was a regular churchgoer, etc. But I accepted his offer to say a prayer with him. I was glad he'd come. In normal life, religion shows too much of its structure. In the atmosphere of that room, religion fell back on its essentials as a faith that relieves when suffering goes beyond human endurance. Fate now played another trick when, about 5 hours later, room was found beside me for a stretcher, which bore the driver of the lorry that had picked me up the night before. They'd run into a machine gun nest, and all but one of the others had been killed. The two survivors had both been wounded in the arm, and they'd driven the heavy lorry back between the two of them, one managing the gears and the other steering. At 3 o'clock, we stole out and made for Dunkirk. When you get this letter, you will have read of this battle that had been raging there. It was agony lying helpless in that ambulance with hell let loose outside. Naval guns, shore batteries, German artillery, planes overhead, all going full blast. Progress was dreadfully slow, as only 4 ambulances at a time could be admitted to the pier. But I think the worst moment was when we were nearly there, and an ammunition dump went off. It was only light stuff, but we could hear the crackling explosion of hundreds of rounds in all directions. Well, we made it. The hospital boat, the surprising sound of an English sister bustling around and settling her charges. Everybody was working as hard as they could. 3 weeks previously, 2 hospital ships had been bombed and machine-gunned in broad daylight. We left at 1 p.m. and had a calm crossing. Then train, ambulance, hospital, and arrived here the following morning. My leg was operated on about midday. By the way, your grey jumper is the only article of personal kit I was able to save. I arrived back in my torn trousers and jacket, no socks or boots or tin helmet. Everything else was lost. I must have looked a hell of a sight, as I'd had no shave for a week. Well, the worst is over now, and I'm being coddled like a baby. Pretty nurses wash me in the morning. The wards are bright and cheery. Flowers, fruit, plenty of good food, and books are wheeled round. In short, I've arrived back in England. And as a postscript from me, one of those pretty Red Cross nurses was my mother. And that's how they met.